Thank you very much for this invitation and for this kind introduction. One of the key obligations of classical archaeology is to investigate and document the physical remains of the ancient Greek world. The remarkable thing about this world is that it was a city-state culture, the largest of its kind in world history, with an estimated 1,500 individual states sharing language and religion, but being individual entities in political, economic, and most other matters. Imagine hundreds of urban centers, each being an individual state with its own constitution, coinage, army, commercial fleet and navy, its own body of citizens, its own local primary production of commodities, its own market and production sites for arts and crafts, and you can continue the list yourself. Ideas jumped from one place to the other, and there was no way that the powerful city-states could control in detail what ought to happen and what not in other city-states. They often tried, of course, because that's how people are. But when they succeeded, the control never lasted for long. When you have understood, ladies and gentlemen, the powers of this socio-economic structure, you have understood why the study of ancient Greece must have a central place in our entire approach to the past. The dynamic relationship between the Greek city-states is what made the ancient Greeks generate so many cultural accomplishments which we regard today as a very big foundation of our civilization. A culture of hundreds of power centers as opposed to large territorial states. Even if their elites are conservative and wish to maintain their own interests and powers, they cannot help inspiring each other to drive things forward simply because they do not control or even know what the others are doing until the new idea stands in front of the gates or embarks in the harbor, so to speak. The very nature of the ancient Greek world has also contributed to the reason why we study it in a very basic way. We study it because the sources, written, epigraphic, and archaeological, exist in vast numbers. The multitude of 1,500 city-states, who all had to have their own version of everything, have simply generated so much material for us to go out and study. Sikyon was such an ancient Greek city-state, one of the old ones, situated in the core of the homeland on the northeastern coast of the Peloponnese. Since June last year, a Danish-Greek project has been conducting fieldwork here, and I'm going to tell you why this project is a good idea and what we have found so far. Let me take the opportunity to thank the people involved in the project. First of all, my Greek co-director sitting here on the first row to the right, Dr. Konstantinos Kissas, who has come all the way from Greece to be with us today. We are very happy about that. And of course, the Carlsberg Foundation, who has shown confidence in the project and, as Professor Besenbacher said, granted us the money to carry it out. In my presentation here, I will emphasize three aspects of importance of our project. I will show how it will almost certainly contribute with new information to an important area of research of the ancient Greek world. This is the primary scope of the project. I will show how there is a potential gain of interesting finds because of Sikyon's unique standing as an art center in the ancient Greek world. And finally, I will demonstrate how the project has already become a good example of basic research in the humanities, because we also do basic research. Let us begin in the middle and then return to the primary scope of the project afterwards. The ancient accomplishments in visual arts play a great role in our entire heritage from antiquity. Arts, crafts, and architecture were practiced in all ancient Greek city-states, but According to the tradition of the ancients, it was Sikyon who was to be credited with certain central inventions and progressions in the arts, and this fact alone makes Sikyon a place of particular importance among the ancient Greek states. Beginning in the world of myth, the Olympian gods were believed to have met at Sikyon after their victory over the giants, to decide on their various areas of responsibility. Prometheus gave fire to mankind at Sikyon as well, some sources claim, and the art of sculpture was said to have been imported to Sikyon from Crete, developed here, and spread out to the rest of the Greek world. Even the art of painting itself were believed to have been invented at Sikyon. Now, the truth in all this, the historical fact, is that the ancients of historical times had developed and used these myths because in historical times Sikyon had developed into being a center for the arts, and there was obviously a need to explain why it had come to that. Before I return to it, let us dwell a little on the myth of the invention of painting. Back in the later 19th century, scholars had identified a certain class of painted pottery which had developed from a more simply decorated one, and the step in style and character from the one to the other is so great that we may speak of an invention that completely changed the drawing technique as well as the compositions, which became more complex and free. In the words of many archaeologists and art historians, the proper art of drawing had finally entered the art of our world, never really to leave it again. It was a Danish scholar, Knud Friis Johansen, who made the first systematic study of this class of pottery, and he wasn't just some archaeologist. I provide a few biographical data for you so you can see for yourself. Just read what he has done and where he was. The typology he established is still used today, and the chronological implications of it is still the backbone of the absolute dating for much of our archaeology in the formative period of the ancient Greek world, roughly 725 to 600 BC. This class of pottery, you see an example up to the right in the slide, was a commodity that went everywhere, sometimes because of its quality and decorations, sometimes also because of its content, and it was produced in more than one place. A truly globalized commodity after the measures of the time. The center of origin of this pottery, where the art of drawing entered pottery decoration, believed by Johansen to have been Sikyon, is now widely believed by many scholars to have been a wider region, including Sikyon and Corinth. Corinth is situated just 20 kilometers to the east of Sikyon, and you will hear more about this place when Bjørn Lovén is giving his presentation. There is not yet a smoking gun to prove that Sikyon really produced this class of pottery. We have a smoking gun at Corinth, but we hope that our project can take this discussion further and perhaps even find the evidence to this effect and prove that old Johansen was right. In the classical period, Sikyon had academies for sculpture and painting, which produced great artists such as Lysippos and Euthychides, and painters such as Eupompos and Pamphilos. Of the painting, nothing is preserved. Of the sculpture, a number of masterpieces live on as Roman versions in marble, for example, the Apoxyomenos shown here. But we have substantial written evidence testifying to the fact that Sikyon was of the greatest significance. Before the time of Eupompos, there was a Greek and an Asiatic school of painting. From Eupompos' time and on, there was an Athenian and a Sikyonian school of painting. Eupompos was the one who inspired Lysippos with his words, "The good artist follows nature, not other artists." By the time of around 300 BC, there was so much art around in the city of Sikyon that a public art gallery had to be founded, and a written catalog was composed to accompany this collection. This was the first of its kind we know of in the entire history of art in our world. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we are referring to ancient Greek art, to its accomplishments in high levels of craftsmanship, stylistic quality, and of composition unsurpassed until the Renaissance, Sikyon was clearly one of the places to set the scene. Sikyon was pushing the development of the visual arts and crafts, and hundreds of city-states followed suit. We find it, of course, extremely interesting to be working in such a place with this kind of history. But as I already said in the beginning, the reason why we're working there is not this in a strict research sense. It's a different one, and this is what we will now take a look at, the principal aim of our project. In 303 BC, 2 years before this famous art gallery was founded and catalog written, the powerful general Demetrius Poliorcetes laid siege to and conquered the city of Sikyon. We are told by a number of written sources that he then founded a new city above the old one on this plateau, which you see here. You see there is a plateau there in the middle to the left, which was easier to defend. He relocated the inhabitants to this new city and changed its name from Sikyon to Demetrius, after himself, and left a garrison in control of the place. We are in the decades following the death of Alexander the Great, and his vast empire had been split up in a handful of territorial kingdoms, and our Demetrius was busy finding his place in this game. I already emphasized that we know an immense amount of things about the ancient Greeks and their cities. But much crucial information still does not exist, and does not exist in sufficient measures. For example, we know very little about the physical aspects of the cities of the old homeland in the archaic and classical periods. We know very little about their urban layout and organization. The early phases of their existence is often almost completely obliterated by later activity, and today modern towns and cities cover the localities, making what little there is left extremely difficult to get to. We know, for example, that Athens was a center of the Greek world already around 750 BC, with a high population, an urban center with monumental architecture, and so on. Well, try and go there and look for the old remains of geometric and archaic Athens. You will have a very hard time to get to it. Here at Sikyon, we possess the combination of the city having been removed, which meant a standstill in activity and a halt in continuous destruction, and two, that no modern city covers the site, which means that the remains are, at least in theory, accessible. The new city, the one on the plateau, has been excavated and studied for almost 150 years by American and then later by Greek archaeologists, and the place is very well known. A recent project, published in a handsome monograph of 2011, brings everything up to date. Of the old city, however, very little is still known, and it is here our project comes in. Rescue excavations have revealed the occasional partial finds of houses with mosaic floors, some graves from various periods, and the very recent excavations in connections with the renovation of the National Highway have revealed a dense neighborhood with houses, streets, and workshops. These finds attest to our belief that the old city was in fact down here in the plain, but up to now, no systematic effort has been made to search for more evidence from the old city there. Our new project sets in with such a systematic investigation aimed at revealing the overall topography of the old city, to identify the course of the city walls, the location of the harbor, the location of major public spaces, public monumental architecture, dwelling quarters with houses, and so on. We will employ 2 PhD students to study and publish central parts of these previous excavations, and then we have brought into action with full speed last summer all sorts of research methods available in archaeology today. Here you see a schematic overview of the project methods and time plan. The PhD students I just mentioned are the second gray line. But before you see the written sources up there, that is the first point. We have got those, but we need the most excellent experts in ancient Greek and Latin to help us read those texts, and luckily our good colleagues are still out in the University of Copenhagen, and they can help us to do that. Let's hope that they don't get closed down here during this year. Without the written sources, we wouldn't even know that there was a place called ancient Sikyon. We wouldn't even know that there were 2 different phases of its history. We wouldn't even know how to begin this project hadn't it been for the written sources, and hadn't it been for the people who know how to read them. Because I know ancient Greek and Latin, but not well enough to operate professionally with these texts. So we need the philologists. Good that they are there. The methods we use for the current fieldwork fall in 3 categories. The red ones you see here. And we aim at collecting as much evidence about the urban fabric of Sikyon and various phases of its history before the conquest of Demetrius. We aim at collecting as much as possible. Then, after the first 2 years, we hope to be able to start excavations at a number of locations where our investigations have generated promising data. The first research tool is the so-called remote sensing, which in our case covers photographs of 3 different categories. We use satellite images, we use aerial photographs, and finally we use photograph generated by drones. The idea is simple. Ruins from buildings and other man-made structures located under the surface of the ground are sometimes discoverable because they leave indirect traces behind. The vegetation on the surface, for example, may have a different color when it is growing above walls situated deep down in the ground than the vegetation growing on top of thick layers of soil and fill. Such phenomena are not easily discovered when you walk around in a landscape. You have to get at a certain distance and see it from far away in order to see patterns that are visible. Here you see a satellite photo which has been analyzed by one of our project members, a very skilled American archaeologist who has specialized in remote sensing. This exercise generated a number of black lines you can see, I think, on the screen, some of which are simply modern structures. Some are so-called paleochannels, so old watercourses which are no longer active, but some may in fact have been ancient structures. These group of parallel lines up in the top of the image to the right. You can also see some circular structures here and there. And then there is a long line going into the sea of a few hundred meters. It's, I cannot point. I can point on this screen. If you all look over here, there is a line going out, a 200-meter long line here. Now, the next step is that you simply go and inspect the spots on the map, and perhaps you actually see something there. And if not, you have to bring more advanced methods into action, and we jump directly to these because of lack of time. This is the next category of investigation tools, and it is the one developed by geophysicists. some of which have been used in archaeological research for decades. The geomagnetic method works in the following way. Geological formations and man-made structures under the surface of the Earth affect the magnetic field which is all around the surface of the Earth, and it is possible to measure these deviations. And here you see how it looks when anomalies are searched for. The data from the measurements is afterwards converted into two-dimensional maps of the anomalies, which then need interpretation. Other methods are geoelectric and seismic measurements. In the former, an electric current is sent into the ground, which, with the help of two electrodes, and the voltage is then measured at two other electrodes. From these two values and the geometry of the electrodes, you can calculate the electrical resistivity distribution of the subsurface, which can then be processed to three-dimensional images of what is below ground. In the seismic method, shock waves are sent into the underground, in our case, generated by beating a sledgehammer onto an anvil. That's what you see in the upper right image there. And these waves travel through the subsurface and are reflected back to the surface of the ground, for example, at geological layers, and they are then registered on the surface with sensors, so-called geophones. The seismic method is widely known in geology as one of the methods to locate deposits of gas and oil, and in this way we may be able to co-sponsor our own project. I will keep the foundation posted on that. We'll see. Here you see the results of the geophysical investigations last summer. If you do not know what such data looks like, just look for areas with gray, white, and black. So you can see we have actually been in a lot of places there in the primary area of research. You will immediately see that the measurements were taken in many different spots rather than in one continuous area, and this is both because we are trying to establish an overview as quickly as possible of the whole area, but it's also because it's also a result of where we could actually work. The whole area is almost completely covered by fields and orchards with olive, apricot, orange, and quince trees, and sometimes they are so densely packed with trees that we couldn't get our measuring equipment through. We found a number of interesting features, and I will briefly comment on three. The northernmost finding is likely to be an urban crossroad, a T-junction, and this is exactly the sort of thing, you can see it up there. If you haven't spotted it, all of you, it's up here, the T-junction. It's exactly the sort of thing we were looking for, streets and houses. It is the streets that turn up in the geomagnetic survey and not the buildings. The buildings are there, of course, but their structural elements are not magnetic and therefore do not return data when searched for with the magnetic method, of course. Here, further south, there's a substantial anomaly, which is a possible candidate for a fortification wall. Here, we supplemented the magnetic investigation with electric and seismic investigations, and here you see a profile of the structure generated by the electric measurements. The red dotted line is the surface of the Earth, and the big red object in the middle is the thing that is possibly a wall, and you see that it is 2 meters below surface. The third example is interesting also methodologically. We see two parallel substantial lines that almost certainly derive from some monumental building, a temple or perhaps a stoa, so another of the things we were looking for. The structure did not turn up in geomagnetic survey, it only showed itself in the electric investigation. We had observed such immense numbers of ancient objects on the surface that we were skeptical about the negative return of data from the magnetic survey. There simply had to be something down there, and there was. We were right when we searched with the correct method. This takes me to the third and final investigation method, which we brought into action last summer, the surface survey. Here, teams of archaeologists systematically walk over the surface of an area and observe what is lying there and collect all ancient objects. Our survey was carried out by Danish and Greek students and directed by Christina Winter Jacobsen, who is sitting down here, now the director of the Danish Institute at Athens and with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what they accomplished. All the fields they searched are marked in dark gray, the architectural fragments with red spots. The survey teams picked up no less than 52,000 objects, which were cleaned, studied, drawn, or photographed. This is already a huge amount of data, which is useful for the project to describe the nature and chronology of human activity in the area, but it also represents, as the other research activities of the project, by the way, basic research in the humanities, an aspect I shall return to shortly. First, some examples of what we actually found in the systematic surface survey. There are larger items, as you saw all the red spots, architecture, like the Doric corner triglyph here in the image below, and to the right you see a base of an Ionic column. I actually managed to walk straight past it when we were searching the area because I was so focused on something else. But luckily I had this bright young student with me and he said, what's this? And we got it into the project this way. The surface survey also generated fine stuff such as fragments of wall paintings and fine figure-decorated pottery, as you see it here. I show you a further image with a small selection. We were very surprised about the quality of many of the finds. Here you see the whole chronological range from late Bronze Age to the medieval period. An archaeological field project like ours generates a great amount of data that we use directly for our research questions, the primary scope of our work, but also data that we do not use directly, data which is used by other scholars in connections which we had no idea of predicting. Archaeology is therefore a great example of basic research in the humanities. A year ago, the Danish prehistoric archaeologist Lasse Sørensen, who is sitting down there in the second row, began to study a collection of more than 5,000 prehistoric objects that had sat in the storerooms of the National Museum of Denmark for decades. The collection was acquired in 1887 by Carl Jacobsen, the founder of the New Carlsberg Glyptotek. We already heard a little bit about it earlier. He acquired the collection from the Greek archaeologist and collector Athanasios Rousopoulos. The collection, which contains the greatest amount of prehistoric obsidian objects outside of Greece, has almost 200 items recorded as being from Sikyon. We don't know where precisely in Sikyon they are found. That's typical for private collections, that there is just a general provenance mentioned. We don't know whether it was here, up on the plateau, New Sikyon or Old Sikyon, or perhaps somewhere in the neighborhood. With our active field project, we may be able to generate evidence relevant to this collection being researched at the moment. I can report that we already found obsidian in our surface survey. And my point here is that it is a complete coincidence that the research itineraries of Lasse Sørensen and our project suddenly meet now. We did not start our project to generate prehistoric material for Lasse Sørensen's project. And it was only over lunch in the National Museum that we both got aware that we were working with Sikyon at the same time. This is just one example of how our project, like many other projects, is practicing basic research in the humanities. We start our projects because we seek answers to important questions that occupy us, but at the same time, we generate data that simply head out in the world and get used in lots of different ways. Therefore, we are keen to publishing our work as quickly as possible, we believe that sharing is the most important step towards excellence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rune, for this report on this very promising site, Sikyon, and the quest for the arts. And we are looking very, very much forward to seeing you finding the arts and knowing from where it's coming. Are there any questions for Rune? Is anybody keen to have? Yes, and please, somebody will bring you a microphone, and when you start speaking, please say your name.
Yes, my name is Bjørn Grønner from the National Museum. What was the structure that went 200 meters out into the sea?
Well, we never got to study it because, and Thomas Heine Nielsen, who is here with us, he can testify that what I say is true. We went there with, I mean, either you have to get Bjørn Lovén to dive out and look and see what it is, or you start setting out a drone, because this was the satellite image. But you, of course, the next step is to take the drone and fly it out and take photographs. And we actually did, isn't it true, Thomas? We made an attempt, but there was such a fierce wind so that I didn't dare fly the drone out. It cost 80,000 Danish crowns, and I didn't want to lose it in the sea. So we don't know. We still don't know. Yeah.
I think we have, yes, please.
Helle Vandkilde, Aarhus University. Could you, Rune, please elaborate a bit on the possibility of the Mycenaean connection? I saw there were Mycenaean sherds so that you had surveyed, and the ancient sources, Pausanias, I believe, also mention Mycenae and a connection between Sikyon and Mycenae. So I thought that would be terribly interesting if you could say a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of Mycenaean finds, also more substantial than what you just saw there. There are some cemeteries found between the plateau and the sea, and they are being researched and published by one of our colleagues working in the area. The settlement, there isn't a good candidate for the settlement at this time. The prehistoric Sikyon, you see, no, it doesn't come, the point doesn't come good through here. There is a candidate for, you see the plateau there next to the blue square, the lower left corner of the blue square, there is a little finger sticking out. That's the candidate for the prehistoric settlement. And it was probably also the Acropolis there of historical Sikyon before it was moved entirely up to the plateau. But there are no structures there. We still know very little. But we, of course, also hope when we get as far as making excavations, we also hope to be able to generate some structures from the Mycenaean period, some houses, and we'll see.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. Paul, you wanted to say something?
Thank you. Paul Petersen. I just wondered, do you have any indications now that the finds in general are older than new Sikyon? I mean, the architectural pieces, how would you think the Ionic Base, for instance? It looked a bit late, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, fortunately, I can tell you that that column was found actually where I just explained that the prehistoric settlement perhaps was. So it's fairly close to the later Sikyon. So it probably dropped from the plateau and down. But of course, this Paul knows exactly where to stick in the knife here. One of our worries have, of course, been that we haven't understood properly the relationship between old and new Sikyon. Now, the sources say the city was removed. What does that actually mean? Does it mean that everybody within 3 weeks were moved up on the plateau in new structures and nothing then went on in the plain? There is some medieval activity down there, but our project is probably also going to be, we are going to be able to modify the historical sources here. We will be able to bring in archaeological evidence to say, well, there was some activity down here, for instance. So I think that it's going to be very interesting to see what will happen there. But it isn't as clear-cut as I presented it in the presentation.
Thank you very much, Rune.